Emergency response deployments are inherently fast-moving and unpredictable. Medical and non-medical volunteers are critical to successful emergency response and a highly important part of the team.
I, as Medical Reserve Corps Director, could not have provided as much help without the volunteers. Volunteers were extremely important, and the fact that a local disaster needs local help. And so my volunteers were familiar faces to the community, and they provided that sense of reassurance of knowing it was their neighbor and instead of a strange person coming from another county.
No matter what the specific nature or duration of the volunteer response, there will always be a time when the incident commander determines it is time to demobilize. Demobilization is the process for reducing personnel and returning to the normal pre-event routines. This is a stage you may not have considered, but it is a process that requires as much attention as any other.
We have demobilization SOPs actually built into our plan that we follow as well, from a flu clinic to a disaster. And that's ensuring not only all of our equipment gets turned back in safely, but all of our volunteers get turned back in safely, and that everyone is signed out, from every 800 radio to every traffic cone to every Jane Smith volunteer. Everything's accountable for.
One of the first steps is for everyone to return all checked out equipment in an orderly fashion. This might include radios, medical equipment, vests, and other gear. Response staff may also need help with general cleanup duties. Supervisors on site may also conduct an after-action review and evaluation. This is an important step to continuously improve emergency response practices. Your honest input on what was done well and what could be improved is welcomed and encouraged. Before you leave the site, it is critical that you formally check out with the supervisor. As is true for all facets of a response, strong communication helps things work well. Those in charge need to know when you are leaving so that they can account for all personnel and ensure safety. The demobilization process does not stop when you leave the volunteer location. Emergency response work can be high intensity and therefore stressful. Even after you return home, that sense of high alert stress may not fade. All responders, volunteers included, therefore, need to be aware of the toll that stress can take.
After being in a disaster situation for some time, maybe they'll just take a breath later and go, oh my goodness, this is really awful. And they're likely to experience some of the same stress reactions that the victims do. They may have nightmares, they may have behavior changes, they'll either become more agitated or very withdrawn and quiet, whatever's off normal for them. They may have eating habits that are different. They either eat too much or don't eat anything at all. The most important thing for them to remember is that these are normal reactions.
If you or your family notices changes in your behavior, if you have trouble sleeping or are anxious, please seek psychological support. Contact your SERV-IN or Medical Reserve Corps unit leader for resources.
We're all human, and human nature, if you're not prepared and trained for something, everything can seem overwhelming. As much training as you can have, still in the moment of a disaster or an emergency, you're going to have that inside thought of, oh, I'm overwhelmed, but then your training kicks in and overtakes your thought process and guides you through every step you need.
One of the things we do here in Indiana is a program called Psychological First Aid. The mental health support that will be available at disaster sites uses this technique to get people through a crisis emotionally. And it's a pretty simple technique and a pretty simple course, and I encourage all volunteers to take it themselves and become knowledgeable about the principles of psychological first aid. They'll be better able to respond and help the victims, and the concepts that they learn will help them deal with their very own stresses so that they can get through this situation successfully.
Contact your local SERV-IN administrator or Medical Reserve Corps unit leader for options to take the psychological first aid course. Remember, it takes a strong person to ask for help, and we need our volunteers strong. So please never shy away from seeking any help that you need. Finally, after you have been through a deployment, you can be an even better recruiter of volunteers. You can provide first-hand experience and explain what it is like to volunteer. A person-to-person recommendation remains one of the best ways to build a strong base of volunteers. We thank you for your commitment to your community by registering as a volunteer for SERV-IN. Your dedication helps make Indiana a better prepared state. If you have any questions or comments, please visit www.serv-in.org or send an email to serv-in@isdh.in.gov.